So we were faced with them going to college, and my son wanting to go to a private college in Chicago, and thinking, we don't have the money. It's just not there. And so that's a problem. And our intention was for our kids to go to college and not have student loans. We would like them not be able to come out of college without student loans, so they don't have the burden of that. And if they want to go further than that, then they can deal with that. But to get them through that 4 years. And so that was really important to us in terms of our goals. And so at that point, I step back and I say, well, okay, this is what we want. And we have a problem. We have limitations around what it is that we're making. So I'm curious about how God's going to show up in our life to allow that to happen. Now, do you see the difference in the feeling about that issue? Do you get a sense of how that shows up differently? How we might live in relationship to it? Rather than obsessing about it, or rather than being worried about it, or jumping ahead about all the reasons why something can't happen, when we all of a sudden show up in a sense of curiosity, we step back from it. Say, I wonder, because what I'm saying, I wonder how the divine presence is going to show up in a way to allow this to happen. And then just rest with it and hold that intention. Now, how would I know in that moment that the senior minister at the downtown church would leave and Karen would be elevated to the senior minister position, which means she was making more money? How would I know that a new ministry for me would show up with seniors that would increase my income? I didn't know at that moment that those things were going to happen, and I had no way of orchestrating those kinds of dynamics, because those kinds of things you don't make those things happen. They show up in the context of us creating a space where Spirit can work in our life in a very powerful way. And so as a result of that, we're able to pay the $3,200 a month that is required for the kids to be in school and not have student loans. And and the gratitude is not just about being able to do that in this moment. The gratitude is about seeing how that creation came about as a result of simply being curious. Curious how God was going to show up and create that process, and then being willing to step into those moments that show up and pay attention to them in our life experience. Eric Butterworth says that as you feel grateful, you become attractive, not only in your beauty and radiance, but in your relationship with people. More importantly, you release a vital energy that draws to you opportunities, employment, and a secure flow of substance. But in order to experience gratitude, I think it begins with curiosity. How is this going to work in my experience? And then just being grateful that I'm connected to God's presence, God's life, God's energy. And I think that's where the real gratitude is. That when I'm grateful for God's presence in my life, I can be grateful for anything. And when I'm curious about how God's presence is going to show up to create what needs to be created in my life, it's so easy to be grateful for that, because the transition is just a simple dynamic transition. Sharon Connors, in a book called Adventures in Prayer, she says, of all the spiritual practices that I've known and tried, the practice of counting my blessings, taking nothing for granted, of giving praise and thanks to God for them, has been the most life-changing and deeply rewarding one. When you are grateful, you are entranced by the fullness of God's love, and the eyes of your heart are open to the grace and goodness that is all around you, all around you and in you. Can't read today. Must be the auction last night. You are able to clearly see the infinite possibilities instead of all the obstacles that stand in your way. You're able to see the infinite possibilities instead of all of the obstacles that stand in your way. When you're grateful to God, you say yes to God's eternal invitation to come dance in the field of miracles. Paul wrote in his letter to the Thessalonians, pray constantly and give thanks in all circumstances. Thank you, God, for the divine unfoldment of this experience in my life, however that's going to unfold. And I'm curious. I'm really curious about how that's going to happen. I'm really interested in the process that's going to take place. I'm going to step back and I'm going to watch this unfold in my life, because I know, you see the feeling and the confidence that I know that Spirit is going to move in a powerful way, because I'm standing in the space of gratitude for that. I know that's going to happen in my life. And life is a lot more fun when we become problem dissolvers instead of problem solvers. You see, curiosity dissolves problems. It isn't about solving them, it's about dissolving them. They no longer exist. Life is not a series of problems to be solved, it's a series of problems that are being dissolved by the consciousness that's showing up with God's presence and energy and life and love and substance. This Thanksgiving, we gather around our family tables, many of us, and oftentimes that means that we are with parents or we are with children or both, on both ends, or grandchildren, or all the different dynamics. And we all have the opportunity, or many of us have the opportunity, to engage in all of the wonderful family dynamics that exist in our families. And you know what those are, whatever they might be. It's, how many parents, still see, You can be 60 years old and your parent 90 and they still see you as 5, right? Okay? You know that. I mean, that's just the way it is, okay? And one of the blessings, of that is that when my parents were still alive, I would say, what's going to be one of the things that's going to be sad about my parents passing is that there will be nobody left in the world that will see me as a child. And when I got into that space, it changed my whole perspective about that dynamic. So we all have the opportunity to enter into whatever those family dynamics are. And we all have had these patterns that have shown up in our life and shown up and have either made those events joyful or have made those events challenging. And so you may be feeling that you're going to this dinner and there's a problem to be solved with Uncle Joe or Aunt Lily or whoever it is that might be there. And I want to invite you this Thanksgiving, in whatever circumstance that you might be in, I want to invite you to show up in curiosity. That to show up not there to solve any problems or to solve the world's problems or to debate politics or any of the things that show up, but I want you to just this one Thanksgiving to show up totally in the space of curiosity. Asking yourself, number one, how God's going to show up in this experience. And number two, how am I going to show up as a curious being? Which means that we're probably going to show up, and instead of offering our opinions and conversation in that way, that perhaps we're going to show up and simply be the purveyor of questions.